moment. I think we're going to get a couple more filter in as we go. So I will actually take advantage of that and use the restroom real quick, and then we'll get started as soon as I'm back. So give me like a minute.
Sounds good.
All right.
Why don't I take this moment to interview you, maybe?
Oh, sounds great.
Astrology. How did this all begin for you?
It's funny. I don't remember like a particular person who turned me onto astrology or anything like that. What I know is that my boyfriend had been given a tarot deck, and he passed it on to me, having never used it. And naturally, having started to read tarot, I was open to a whole world of other kind of magical traditions. And I know that I was drawn to astrology out of all of those traditions in particular because there are a lot of astrological references or like little Easter eggs in the symbols that are in tarot cards. And so they were introduced to me through tarot. But I don't remember anything in particular about how or when. It was all kind of a blur of like being introduced to this kind of more subjective framework for understanding reality in which doing magic made sense at all.
Got it. So it was just kind of like a symptom. That sounds bad, but I don't mean in a bad way.
Yeah,
A phenomenon related to your tumble down the magic wormhole.
absolutely. That's right. Yeah.
How has being down the magic wormhole changed your life?
It's really interesting. I think one of the biggest ways that it changes my life is that it makes me less legible. I think we have a difficult time as a culture knowing what to make of somebody who can signal a lot of things that have to do with like intelligence and competence. I'm a lawyer. I think that signals those things for a lot of people in our culture, and that I would also believe in magic and practice astrology. People don't know how to make sense of somebody who can be in this wooey place and then also be in this like culturally accepted or even kind of elevated place. And I even find myself kind of confusing having like stepped into both of these worlds.
Right. You're like the representative of the legalistic class. So that's like the foundation of society. But you also operate in the interpersonal, non-empirical realm.
Yeah, I'm a pretty spooky person because I have sort of rejected consensus reality, and yet I hold a lot of power within it. So if you didn't know me well, I would find it difficult to trust me, I imagine. It's like a spooky kind of person.
Very spooky. This is what I think of when I think of you. Spooky. I was talking about Philip K. Dick with somebody the other day, and she said something that really stuck with me. She said the phrase, reality is just a thing that some people believe in sometimes. And I enjoyed that. I mean, none of us construct our reality empirically, right? We don't like reason from first principles when we're like sorting out our priorities or like making our to-do list or doing things that even might have like a rational framing. It bottoms out in stuff that we can't know. And so I think it's totally consistent to say, over here, I'm going to use this framework. Over here, this one is more fun for reasons that I don't feel like defending. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like being bilingual. I speak two different languages, and I wouldn't try to use them in the opposite contexts.
Right. You wouldn't be like, Your Honor, the person on the stand seems to have their moon in something, and therefore Exhibit C should be disregarded.
Yeah, that would not work well for me.
Well, we are starting off hot. This is awesome. So I am now extremely psyched for this. Hey, everybody. Welcome to ASTROPILLED number 12 with Sasha Chopin, myself, Saddle Sood, and maybe Gray. Dalton, that's awesome that you had a tarot reading. They are very eye-opening. I'd love to hear about that. I hope you do a Twitter thread on it if you haven't already. But let's kick things off. So My name is Sadal or Wei. I am a software engineer and architect by trade, and I discovered astrology about 3 to 4 years ago, I believe. It always changes the number because time is very wobbly right now. But I kind of just fell deep into the rabbit hole and have ever since been trying to apply what I know about software and statistics and computation to astrology in order to understand it, especially with an eye towards market prediction. And I'm especially interested in like political and geopolitical astrology as well. I'm going to turn it over to Maybe, and then I've got some questions for Sasha just to kick us off, and then we're going to dive deep into this chart. Maybe why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I've introduced myself more than usual by now already, but as you've heard, I did get into astrology from tarot, and that might give you a hint as to the fact that I come at astrology from a sort of spiritual, psychological, and relational perspective. And I was drawn to it having done a lot of tarot reading for myself and others in, difficult relationship periods of their lives or times when they're trying to understand themselves better. And I found that astrology had a sort of depth that always seemed to underlie and agree with the tarot readings that I would do for myself and other people. And so naturally it became my practice to do both of them together and help with my interpretations by having both of those perspectives come in a line.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sasha, so I'd love to hear from you. If you're to describe yourself briefly in a couple sentences, who you are, what your deal is to somebody who might not already know you. And I'd also love to hear what your experience with astrology is and what you're hoping to get out of this little session.
Well, I'm a writer and a writing coach. So I write things, typically weird essays and catalogs for galleries in Sweden, and the occasional book. And as a writing coach, I help people reach their creative potential, which is a super gratifying job. That's about it. I live in LA. There's not much more about me, I think, that's important superficially. Astrology. So I had one chart reading in my mid-20s with a well-known poet who I really admired. And because she was a well-known poet who I really admired, I spent the whole time being kind of starstruck and confused, and I don't remember a single fucking thing that happened during that reading. Her name's Ariana Rines. She's a wonderful poet, and as far as I can recall, a great astrologer, but I don't know. I don't really know how to evaluate these things. Were you sort of asking like what my relationship with astrology is on some sort of like values based
however
level?
you'd like to take it, like we generally, it's useful for us to know how much experience you've had so we know how much to elucidate. We do tend to over describe a little bit on this podcast because we do have more casual astrology viewers, but however you'd like to take the question. Yeah.
Act as if you're speaking to a person from another civilization who's never encountered any of the things you're talking about. Because I think I have a little bit of knowledge, like the proverbial little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. Like, I think I know just enough to get me into trouble. Mm-hmm. So I would prefer you not defer to me on anything ever over the course of this webcast.
Gotcha.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool. And is there anywhere in particular you'd like to focus on, or are you just kind of interested to see what comes up as we look through the chart?
I just want to keep it fun and fresh and take it wherever you guys want to take it.
Awesome. Can do. Cool. Well, then let's kick off and take a look at this chart in detail. So this is you, Sasha, or specifically a picture of the sky at the time of your birth. You have a ascendant in Pisces, and the ascendant essentially marks the degree of the zodiac that was on the horizon at the time of your birth. So you can read this AS or ascendant at 21 degrees 59 minutes as being the horizon. So all of the planets below the ascendant are actually below the horizon. So at the time of your birth, they would have been below your feet, literally in the sky. So you were born at nighttime. And then all of the planets that we have up above were above you in the sky. And typically we like to break into this with looking at the big three. So that is your ascendant, your sun sign, and your moon sign. And you have your ascendant in Pisces. And so the ascendant, often I describe it as if you were, at a party and people didn't know you well and they just saw you across the room or had kind of like a surface level conversation with you, they'd get 50% of your ascendant sign and 50% of your sun sign is how I like to describe it. And the ascendant sometimes can be something that we project almost unconsciously. It's sort of like our default way of dealing with especially other people, but also the world and problems in general. And so a Pisces ascendant lends to the character a very strong sort of like intuitive sense about the world. It is a sign that has to do with joining with the world, with understanding things by removing boundaries, by dissolving those boundaries. And it often leads to a higher willingness to dive into emotionality, into intuitive realms of thought, into, deeply connecting with other people in an almost like automatic, deeply sympathetic way that can sometimes almost be like a psychological transference effect. Pisces rising also tends to be very observant because they take in lots and lots and lots of information. Pisces sometimes gets a bad rap for being like overly dreamy or like out of touch with reality or whatever. But in my personal experience, it is actually that Pisces people tend to be a little bit more low-key and chill because they're always taking in tons of information, like tons and tons of data, because they often have a very good intuitive sense and feel for all of it. For your sun sign, the sun sign is often what you'll hear described as like, oh, you have your this thing, so you go to your daily horoscope in the newspaper and it's totally vague and doesn't apply to anybody, or it applies to everybody, which is the point. But as you can see here, you actually have way more, including your ascendant, your moon, your sun sign, and all these other planets that we're going to get to throughout the course of this. I
have to pay for an electrician.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'll be right back.
So we knew that this might happen, so we're just going to keep talking a little bit. So maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about what you're excited to get into this here, because he has a really awesome chart without, going too much into the details so we don't, have Sasha miss out.
Yeah, I'm really excited to address coming up that I think for me personally, this is the chart with the most retrograde planetary energy that I've seen. And to have that stationary Mercury there too is something that I'm really interested in. I think that it's going to speak a lot to the unconventional expression of a lot of these energies. So I'm excited to see how that resonates with Sasha for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it's got a really close square. Like, I love the fact that he has this almost exact 2-degree separation between these two planets, or the node and Mars, squaring his Venus and Mercury, which also have this 2-degree separation. And I think that's a very interesting kind of like rhyme, even though they don't touch each other exactly. They're still very, very close.
Yeah, and then we've got that Saturn-Uranus conjunction higher in the sky interacting with them too. So it is a very distinctive chart. There's a lot of really prominent energies that are combining in really interesting ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't read a ton of Sagittarius Saturns. Like, for whatever reason, I tend to get people who are close to my generation or have like Aquarius Saturn or Capricorn Saturn, or like sometimes a Leo Saturn and like a Libra Saturn, something like that. But I don't get to read that many Sagittarius Saturns for some reason, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting placement in the sky, and I think of Sagittarius as, of course, so Jupiter. So to have Saturn there would be a really interesting balance on the exploration and indulgence of the typical Sagittarian.
Yeah, and then you throw Uranus in there and you put it close to the midheaven, and you've got a very interesting story. So I'm super curious to hear Sasha reflect on his life a little bit more there.
Yeah. I'm excited about it too. I'm such a huge fan of Sasha's wife, Victoria. And so when I know couples, I can't look at their chart without wondering. It's I wonder how his wife fits into this. So it's one day we'll have to invite them both back as a team and see if we can talk to her about her chart and then think, oh, this must be why you and Sasha, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of interesting opportunity for us to expand with this format as well, because chat, pretty soon we'll actually we need to work out the logistics and how we're going to do this, but we're going to have, I think, I've never actually said the name out loud, but I think it's Ta Lu Moat on, except, he's anonymous, so we're going to try and preserve his anonymity. We're not even going to show the chart. We're just going to be talking about the events that have happened in his life and see if we can do astrology with a operational security mindset as we approach it, which should be a very interesting challenge. Hey, welcome back, Sasha.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I am the worst guest that you have ever had.
No worries.
I will try to make up for it.
Yeah, no problem. No problem whatsoever. Okay, well, let's jump back into it. So before I was previously talking about your ascendant in Pisces, and now I want to turn my attention to your sun in Cancer. So Cancer is often considered, one of the sensitive signs, one of the very emotional signs, but on the other side of Cancer is also a strong cardinal energy. It is a cardinal sign, which all the cardinal signs have a lot of emphatic power within them. They do things. They want to make things happen. They often are very big, beginners, leader types. That sort of energy is what cardinal signs bring to the table. So when you have a Cancer sun, while it is very emotionally driven, and it's often driven by our connections to the people that we care about and the people that we love, especially anything that we consider to be our personal family, a Cancer sun also generally wants to drive through the world in that mission of, taking care of other people or helping other people, or even engaging in the realm of sentimentality and memory and history, which I think is very applicable for you because, you are a memoirist, at least in some of your works. And so, a Cancer sun there totally makes sense to me. You also have your moon in Libra, which is a sign that is also cardinal, so you have even more of that sort of powerful, a motivated, let's do things, let's make things happen sort of dynamic within yourself. And the moon will typically rule how you process events in an emotional manner. So it's also the nature of the mind overall and how you react to things on a deep physical, gut sort of level. So moon in Libra is this planet that is very much about, and when I say planet, it's just kind of a catch-all term because, not all of these are planets. It's a moon, obviously. Sun's obviously a sun. But a moon in Libra often will tend to make the mind very egalitarian in nature, very fair-minded. Libra is all about the scales. It's about balance. It's about equity and equality. So it wouldn't surprise me if, within your personality, you're somebody who cares a lot about, the suffering of others, or in fairness or injustice or topics like that. Another way this can sometimes manifest is that when it comes to making decisions about your feelings, there can be a fair amount of indecision because there's a constant weighing and a back and forth of all of those qualities that are happening internally. Yeah, I'll stop there because I've said a lot. How does all of this resonate for you so far?
Well, I sure do like the word powerful being applied multiple times to me in a short period of time. That's very nice to hear. So connection and intuition is really interesting because I do like speaking with people and connecting with people. I'm a very social person. At the same time, I have, a faint soupçon of Asperger's, just a whisper. I'm 10% autistic. Mm-hmm. So I'm as likely to be absorbed with somebody in conversation as I am to be spacing out and thinking about UFC statistics or something. Mm-hmm. But in fairness to your chart and my chart, I guess it's your rendition of my chart. It's my chart. In fairness to my chart, you did say it was 50% representative. And I think the ascendant sign, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it is about a coin flip whether on a given day I can be super vibey and connected with people, or whether I'm just like on my own planet. In terms of Cancer, so I mean, being emotional and enterprising seems like a pretty obvious fit with the whole like writer and coach thing, right? I communicate for a living, but I do it in a self-centered way where my name is on it. And I do the initiating. So Libra, that's one that's sort of throwing me for a loop, because I sort of think of myself as kind of a selfish jerk in some ways, but I also don't think I act that way all the time. So it could be that my feelings of being a selfish jerk are like proprioception that stops me from being that way. Know what I mean?
I mean, I would say that is sort of a feeling that a Libra moon would have as a reaction, to be like, oh, I'm being selfish right now. I need to not be that way, So because I would say that other moons that are actually more selfish would never even think about it. They'd never have that thought. I'm going to turn the fan on, but please keep talking.
Although I'm sure some people actually can correctly identify their selfishness. So I'm conflicted about this one. This one I'm going to have to think about. Talking about oneself.
Yeah, it's tough. We can turn it over to maybe if you'd like to take a little more time to process.
I think there's one thing to say, which is that I'm really eager to like do people a favor. I love having a job to make people happy. And I think like there's a fairness instinct for me in that, where it's like, if someone like needs me to do something, I'm like, oh, well, I have resources. I have like a physical body that can act in space. And so I ought to do this thing because it's the thing to do. Like, it's kind of like self-evident for me. I think I am selfish, but I think it more comes from like a blinkered perspective than a sense that like other people's preferences are less important than my own. Like I'm just spacey, and I just like forget what other people want and deserve sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting because you actually have a specific aspect called an inconjunct between your moon and your ascendant. So, and you also have your Mars and node in Pisces as well. So that adds more to these Piscean qualities within your personality. And we'll get to the Mars and node a little bit more, but just generally speaking, this moon in Libra, which I could say, to a large degree would represent a altruistic impulse, but also the Cancerian part of yourself is a more nurturing, personal side of that, because like the Libra manifestation is kind of like, galas and charity balls and stuff like that, and Cancer is like, I will mother you and nurture you and take care of you on a personal level. So there's a little bit of both that happen, but at the same time, a Pisces ascendant, one of the qualities of Pisces is that it can sometimes be evasive or can tend to disappear from the scene, and that's not necessarily sometimes it is a desire, like a don't look at me sort of vibe, but sometimes it's literally just like Pisces vibing and just like contemplation just sort of wandered off. And it's interesting to hear you describe this inner conflict almost as kind of like a confusing sort of piece or an irritation or a discomfort in some way between the two dynamics, because what you have here is an inconjunct, and that is 150 degrees between your ascendant and your moon. And the inconjunct, typically the way you read it, is because it's between two signs that are not in the same sign group. So like air signs and water signs don't really get along super well, and they're also not in the same mode. So Libra is a cardinal sign and Pisces is a mutable sign. So when you have an inconjunct between the two of them, it's like the two placements have nothing in common, and there's like this constant awareness of this sort of like alien energy that exists from either perspective, and it's just a matter of which one you're sort of embodying at the time. Does that feel like it tracks at all, or do you relate to that?
I'm going to have to explore this out loud a little bit more.
Yeah.
So they're in different groups. Cancer's water, Libra's air.
Yeah, so air and fire go well together, generally speaking. They're naturally compatible. And water and earth go well together, and they're naturally compatible. Air with earth or water doesn't work so well by default, and fire with earth or water doesn't work so well by default.
Right. You can't drink, I mean, you can't breathe the water, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So Pisces, no, a Cancer, no, what is it ascendant? Pisces ascendant. Right. So a Pisces ascendant is more touchy-feely, moment-to-moment, taking in information. And a Libra is more of a broader perspective, fairness and egalitarianism. So I can see those being two modes that are like both useful in different situations, but definitely not coextensive, right? Like, we all know egalitarian people who insist on fairness in every situation, and we're all thinking about their principles, and those people fucking infuriate me. I mean, like, I admire them, but on an interpersonal level, it's really hard for me to understand that as like an organizing principle for how you behave on an average Wednesday, right? But I guess an egalitarian principle is really useful in conflict management and lots of areas where like resource allocation is a very important skill in so many areas of life. So I can see it being a thing where they're both good tools to have in the tool set. The problem might be not having full control or full awareness of like which tool in the tool belt you're reaching for at a given time, right?
Yeah.
Like, I might think I'm acting in an egalitarian way because that's the sort of person I am. I think I'm great at conflict management, but really what's going on is I'm just being emotional and intuitive, and thus maybe blinkered, selfish, a little bit chaotic, you know?
Potentially, yeah. Because, you know, depending on which way you're leaning, one principle may be overriding the other or displaying more strength in that moment. And especially because you actually have your moon in the 8th house, which is considered to be a dark house. The planets in the dark houses often operate in a more subtle or subdued way. And when they're in aspect to other planets or placements, the other placements will often dominate them or have a stronger effect in general, especially your ascendant. But it's a little tough because, you know, the moon is also a very major placement. So while, you know, I think the way you've described this makes sense given its placement, because it seems like you're describing that while you value this part, it often feels like it can get covered up or hidden by this other cycle that you've got happening, or this other principle that you've got happening, the Piscean one. To add a little bit more to the 8th house, then I want to turn it over to Maybe, since she hasn't had a chance to really dump all of her knowledge yet. Your 8th house moon is very interesting because you specifically are a coach for other people, and the 8th house has to do with other people's stuff, their possessions, their properties, their values, their ideas, like literally anything that you can be said to possess and to accumulate, that's the 8th house. So to have your moon there and to also know that you're a coach and you work in this like very emotionally collaborative role, working with other writers, that like, mwah, that's perfect. You're living your chart, you know? That's what we call that when you're doing that. So I really, really like that. Let me turn it over to Maybe real quick. And what are you else? Where else is your eye going to, Maybe?
Well, there was one thing that resonated with me in this like coin flip analogy, whether this Piscean Martian quality is going to come out in situations for Sasha, or the lunar Libran one. And one thing that I think is really interesting about that is that you're right, the moon is such a strong placement that even in a hidden house, it's the sect light for this chart. So and for everyone, the moon represents not just our emotions, but our instincts. So in a novel context that you haven't encountered before, anybody is likely to like reach for their moon sign for the energy to meet that situation with. At the same time, having a first house Mars is also really prominent. The houses are these sections that in a whole sign house like this or chart like this, they like line up exactly with the signs. So if it's in the first sign in this chart, it's in the first house. And the houses, one of the ways that you can see them is the order in which you develop through your life. So the first house is about your sense of self as a very basic thing, and your sense of having a body, and your sense of being a part of the world. And then the second house has to do with your daily routines and such, and it develops in complexity over the first little section of your life.
Sorry to interrupt.
Please do.
I don't know where the houses are in this chart. I'm looking at the chart and I'm not seeing any houses. And also, I would like to say that I love the vocabulary here, just like dark house and like Martian qualities. This is pretty fun stuff. But go on, tell me about the houses.
I definitely agree that the language of astrology is like madly appealing. I think it's a big part of what draws people into the rabbit hole. At least any of us that have big mercurial qualities, we just like can't get enough of the vocabulary. But sorry, the numbers along the inner circle where these lines in different colors are drawn, they read like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I can see why it can be a little bit difficult to identify, because they do line up perfectly with the signs along the outside of the ring, but those numbers represent the houses, and then the symbols on the outside with the colors represent the signs. So the first house is an area of your life that you would develop much earlier than the 8th house. So although you're going to have all of these planetary energies affecting you all the time, the Martian energy in your life would have been like the theme in the first year that you were born, and it's something that you would have returned to earlier in your life and developed further compared to your moon sign. And Mars is like suited to the first house. It is a little bit it's willing to be selfish. It's concerned with the self and driving the self forward in life, and that can make it impulsive. And in Pisces, that impulsiveness can get doubled down on in a bit, because Pisces is a bit of a spacier place. So you might not notice that you're being impulsive until your moon catches up and it was like, oh, what did I just do that? You know?
Cool.
There's something else that I think is really interesting to point out. We've talked a little bit about how your moon being in the 8th is really aligned with your career. And I wanted to point out that your Venus-Mercury conjunction in Gemini is also really well suited to not just your career, but everything surrounding it. The way that you meet clients through Twitter, for instance, it's this really socially driven approach to making a living. And Gemini is the most social sign, in my opinion, of the zodiac. Mercury rules Gemini, so having Mercury in its own sign is one of the parts of your chart that is particularly powerful. And your Mercury is also in a really interesting point in its own cycle. You can see there's if you see the glyph for Mercury is very much like Venus. It just has the little horns and it has the little S. And so that is telling us that Mercury was stationary. It was at this weird point in the sky where it either was just about to go retrograde or just about to stop being retrograde. So from our perspective on Earth, it would look like Mercury was just like suspended still in the sky for this period. And that makes Mercury a really prominent and powerful energy for somebody who has that in their natal chart. So Mercury is all about thought, technology, communication, writing, that you would end up being somebody who coaches people you meet online about writing is just incredibly stationary Mercury in Gemini, especially in that it's ruling itself. And at the same time, Venus is right there. And Venus is all about how we connect to other people and love each other. And that is amplified by the social nature of Gemini. And so that aligns to me with how you've expressed that it's very fulfilling for you to do this kind of work, that to see somebody reach more of their creative potential because of the friendship and mentorship that you've offered them is really something that would be fulfilling to this Venus in Gemini that's sharing space with your very powerful Mercury in Gemini. And then Venus is also retrograde, which is, I'll correct myself if I'm wrong at some point, but I'm pretty sure it's the most rare retrograde energy that one would have in a natal chart. Maybe only like 7% of people would have a placement like that. So on top of it being somebody who's very aligned with being social and loving other people and wanting to show that love by communicating a lot, you're not afraid to love people in unconventional ways. You're not afraid to love unconventional people. You're not afraid to support people who have unconventional projects or goals. And I see that a lot from this retrograde energy. Retrograde energy is looked at differently in modern astrology and more traditional astrology. In more traditional astrology, it is going to point more to an energy that takes longer to express itself or has to be more focused to express itself and might be difficult for somebody to notice from the outside if the native isn't really leaning into that energy and expressing it. But in more modern astrology, it can often be seen as energy that expresses itself more subjectively, more inwardly, something that you would have your own ideas about it that other people might find iconoclast. It makes me think of, and this is just something I happen to know about you, but I believe you got married in your pajamas and your wife's bouquet was a bunch of toilet paper. And that is some really cool retrograde Venus energy, in my opinion, for example.
Also Gemini, because Gemini
Yes.
being ruled by Mercury is all about kind of like jokes and play and comedy and stuff like that, which I love.
Yeah, so I wonder how this part resonates with you, Asha.
Well, my mind is spinning a little bit. There's so much to take in, so many little symbols. I don't know what they mean. I know what they mean a little bit now, but retrograde Venus energy. Very interesting. So I think one thing that is interesting to me about this whole picture is that a lot of it fits. But there's this like part of me that I consider foundational that isn't really popping up. And okay, it's not the responsibility of the chart to track every single element of who I am, but there's also this side of me that's defined by a real obsessive streak. Like I get really into something, like deeply, deeply into something for like months. And then it's on to the next thing. And like my mind is just sort of this accretion of the scar tissue of all of these different obsessions I've had. Like I know way too much about like 20 subjects that were each all I was thinking about for 3 months before I dropped them entirely in favor of something else.
Huh. I have thoughts on that, but maybe do you have thoughts first?
Well, I see Pluto in Scorpio in the 9th house.
Yeah.
When you say that. That's its name. Yeah, there's just nothing more Pluto and Scorpio than my life is the scar tissue of a series of obsessions that were all I was thinking about until I dropped them entirely. Like I can't explain Pluto and Scorpio significations better than that.
Yeah.
The 9th house, that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, because like 9th house is all about learning, knowledge, research, education, all that kind of stuff. Additionally,
Tell me about this. Okay, give me your additionally, but also, if you feel like it, segue into this whole house thing. Well, I now know where the houses are located, but you keep saying houses, dark house, and I am intrigued but do not understand what this means.
Okay, yeah, let's do a breakdown of the houses first, because that'll probably help frame everything that we've said and everything else we're going to say. So essentially, the natal chart is a 2D projection of a 3D space. And if you imagine these houses, it's actually like, say you've taken a globe or maybe a watermelon or whatever. It's oblong, so it might make the visualization a little easier, where you basically split it like the houses from this angle, and then you now have 12 pieces going like that around the globe. And so this is actually what's happening in the sky. So houses 1 through 6, or specifically the ascendant down to the descendant, and the houses below are underneath you. That's that area of the 3D sky, and everything above is above. And so I really like Dane Rudyard's approach to describing houses, which is that they represent the cycle of birth until death. And that's not a literal metaphor, but it is a good metaphor to understand the functionality of all of the houses. So, for instance, the first house has to do all about your personal identity, who you are. Like, as if you were a child, you're born, you realize you exist, and that is where you start. Part of Dane Rudyard's thing is it's a child developmental psychological model that he also overlays on it as a explanation. It's not really meant literally for that application, but as the metaphor goes, you are born, you realize you exist, and then you move into the second house, you realize you have arms, hands, legs, a body, and then the second house is all about your possessions, the things that you own, the things that are yours, that you can say to be yours. And it's not just your body or the physicality, but also money, your values, your reputation, even in some cases, even abstract things that you can consider to have and own. Then the third house is when you look around, you realize you have brothers, you have sisters, you have a family environment, you have a area that you're growing up in. And so that's where we tend to come into contact with other people, with our immediate environment. And it's also where we find sort of like the daily rituals and habits and routines of the things that we do for ourselves, for joy, for personal exploration and expression. Then we get over into the fourth house, which is much more about like, okay, first we're looking at what's inside the house. Now this is the house itself, and I mean a literal house. Like this, the fourth house is your home. It is also your center of intimacy, your sentimentality, things like that. So the fact that you're a memoirist also fits with Venus and Mercury in the fourth house as well. The fact that you're a writer works with Jupiter in the third house, because Jupiter rules how we grow in life, how we expand, how we receive joy, wisdom, teach others, things like that. And then the fifth house is all about creativity and the things that you make. So it's often associated with like children, as a result sexuality, because those are like literal creations, but also like your hobbies, your projects, your artistic creations. And writing is a very fifth house activity as well. So with your sun there and your Chiron there, which we can touch on a little later, it's all working. And in the sixth house, you get into the realm of like health habits, routines, like how you deal with crisis situations, things like that. In the seventh, we meet relationships with other people, often committed relationships, so marriages, business partnerships, things like that. The eighth house we've touched on a little bit. It's other people's possessions. So as we move from 1 through 6, we have been entirely internal and focused on the self, or at least the self-driven motivations and needs. And as we move towards the 7th through the 12th, we're now approaching the outside world and everything else and everybody else. So as we go towards the 8th house, it's other people's possessions, other people's things, and how we deal with those things. And in the 9th house, it's all about learning and education and institutional knowledge, often religious institutions, sometimes government institutions, international travel, foreign, like foreign cultures, things like that. And the 10th house is the house of your overall kind of like what you're known for, what you put out into the world. For many people, it's often described as their career, but it's not really just that. It's really like what people will know you for, or how you project out into the world at large. The ascendant is like person to person. Midheaven is more like you to everybody, if that makes sense. And then the 11th house has to do with our friendships, our social groups and clubs. It's especially kind of like groups of people, organizations, clubs. Like if you have a regular meetup you go to, like that would fall into the 11th house. And then in the 12th house, we have the house of undoing, or I like to call it, the unfolding of things. It's how do things end? How do things finish? What must happen in preparation for the next phase of life? So the 12th house is often associated with topics like death, disillusion, like releasing things, letting things go, stuff like that. But it's really about how you deal with those topics that determines the 12th house. So the idea is that within the astrological house, every single astrological house system, every single experience we have slots into one of those houses, and we can understand the relationship between the houses based on the planets that rule the different houses as well. So, for example, you actually have your midheaven is in Jupiter, or in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter in the 3rd house, and so your midheaven, the thing that you put out into the world, is ruled by Jupiter. So Jupiter signifies your general career significations, and Jupiter being in your 3rd house in Taurus for you is all about that writing, because the 3rd house is often about writing as well. It's about kind of like notes, frequent communications with people, stuff like that. And it is so beautiful how it all comes together. It's incredible. And so also with Taurus in the 3rd house, we might say that, okay, the manner in which you tend to accomplish this goal tends to be accumulative. It tends to want to build up over time. It tends to want to be patient, a little bit slower. It wants to like build brick by brick by brick, but also there's like a sense of pride and accomplishment. And sometimes there can be an element of hoarding, like look at all the things that I've got, because that's also a very Taurus thing. So I'll pause there. Does that land with you?
It's such a whirlwind. Well, it's making me feel good. I mean, it's nice to be seen. It is almost never the case that I spend an hour of my life talking about my characteristics in a very systematized and flattering way. Seems good. No objections so far. Thank you for the breakdown of the houses.
Absolutely. So the thing I was going to additionally about is actually the fact that you have Saturn and Uranus exactly conjunct in your midheaven, which is very interesting because Sagittarius generally is going to give whoever it is like a very like wide-ranging sort of like truth-seeking behavior. So wherever that house is tends to be the desire to like learn things, to pursue knowledge, to find like some fundamental truth about whatever it is really. And it often has a sort of like proselytizing nature as well, which is like, now that I've found this, I'm going to show it to everybody. The way I like to describe Sagittarius is like the night after the Holy Grail in a way. Even if the thing might not actually exist, they're going to do their best and they're going to like bring it home if they can. They're going to try everything that they can. And so with your Saturn and Uranus exactly conjunct, there's a very interesting thing happening here. Because you have your Saturn is this planet that has to do with hard work, responsibility, with duty, with all of the things that kind of like suck, like all the hard work that you have to put in. And then Uranus is exactly conjunct there. And Uranus is the planet of like, I call it the table flipping planet because it's the planet of like revolutionary energy. It's the planet of like just changing things up for absolutely no reason at any time. It's perceived as no reason, but often there are deep reasons for it, mostly to innovate, to revolutionize structures, to rebuild things, to invent new ways of being and seeing and understanding. And you have both of these planets super close to your midheaven, which is the thing you're known for putting out into the world, right? That's the significator for how you progress through the world. So there's this very interesting story of like obsessive learning and fixation on sort of like academic or obscure topics can be the 9th house as well. And then in the 10th house, because you're a writer, the world often sees the results of what you're thinking about and what you're working on. But your Saturn and Uranus conjunction here is super interesting, especially in Sagittarius, because it's like Saturn is trying his best to like pull all of the stuff that you've got going on together and to like materialize it into something structural and packaged, because that's Saturn. It wants to materialize, it wants to build, it wants to construct. But you've got this very, very like wild exploratory energy going around your 10th house. But I'm going to turn it over to Maybe because I've been doing a lot of talking this episode.
Yeah, I think there's another thing that's interesting about this Saturn-Uranus conjunction. near the midhaven, because it also opposes your Sun Chiron conjunction in Cancer. And that again speaks to me about where some of your talents as a writing coach might come from. I think I would imagine that there are people who need help with creative projects, and some of them need more discipline, and some of them need to shake up their discipline and try something new and get out of a rut. And with your Saturn and Uranus conjunct near your midhaven, you are so well equipped to help either of those people. You have both of those energies right there. And because they are aspected to your Sun and Chiron in Cancer, they have a relationship with that other side of you. And I imagine that that side of you is able to lend a lot of compassion to the work that you do with your coaching clients. Cancer is a sign that naturally understands what other people are going through, just very empathetic in a way that doesn't take a lot of effort for the Cancer person. And to have Chiron there too, Chiron represents the core wounds in our lives, the things that we are most insecure or vulnerable around, that we end up coming back to time and time again throughout our lives, and growing from the experience of needing to integrate these weaknesses that we may have. So to have not just that your Sun is very close to that place and that those are both in Cancer, but that they are having a relationship with the house that has to do with your career and your legacy and the way that people get to know you, shows me that there is a lot of compassion and understanding that you're able to draw from your personal experience and offer in your career to your coaching clients. I wonder how this relationship resonates. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So it's like the compassionate stuff, to use a radical shorthand, because I'm not going to be able to repeat all the things you just said. There's all this compassionate stuff, and it's related to this weird combination of orderly energy and also table flipping energy. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the table flipping energy and the work hard energy are both related to my central wound.
Yeah, well, your Sun and your central wound are in the same place in your life. So they're in the same place in the sky, and it's likely that the parts of yourself that you've worked the most on, because they've been the most vulnerable, also ended up being a big part of your identity. And because that part of yourself has a relationship in the sky with the part of yourself that shows up in your career and in your coaching clients and in your public life, it's likely that you're able to draw upon that part of your identity to give people the structure they need or the change that they need in a way that doesn't feel judgmental or threatening or like criticism. I imagine it as being kind of like big brother-y kind of energy, like, hey, I totally get what you're going through. I think I could totally see myself going through the same kind of thing if I was in your position, but I think this change might help you, or I think leaning into this kind of discipline might help you. And that would feel like very accessible compared to perhaps a Saturn-Uranus conjunction in your 10th house that wasn't having a relationship with the lower part of the sky. It might come across for a person with that kind of a chart as very like, I know what you should do better than you do, and I'm the authority. But you are able to bring so much more warmth to your role as a mentor than somebody who didn't have that kind of aspect.
Awesome. I mean, right on. I hope so. I think the table flipping order thing makes a lot of sense to me, because it's at once true and I think atypical that when I'm working hard, I work harder than anybody I know. And I'm capable of writing books and starting my own business and doing all of these impressive things. At the same time, I can be a total nightmare, like abandoning 10 projects halfway through, suddenly deciding I want to live somewhere else, that there are foundational problems in my life that need solving with some drastic gesture that doesn't make any sense. And I think that very like high entropy and error prone way of living with like lots of bets doubled down upon at the last minute is where I've gathered a lot of the experience that I bring to my clients, because I think I've experienced lots of sides of the creative life, right? Like I've experienced like, oh, I achieved my childhood dream through like hard work and ingenuity. And like, oh, I also spent 3 years, producing nothing but like acid reflux. So like that definitely resonates. I know we're coming up on the hour, but one thing I'm really interested in is like, I'm hearing lots of like positive normative stuff about my personality, which is awesome. But there's all of this empty space on the chart. And I'm wondering like, what's the like conspicuous absence here? Or to like put it another way, like the opposite me. What does the opposite me have? And what does that say?
It's an interesting way to put it, like an opposite you. I guess in astrological terms, the way I might talk about it is an intermittent you. The planetary energies that show up in your birth chart are relatively consistent because they were there at your birth. They will impact the way that you live out your entire life. But empty houses tend to be significant when the current planetary energies passing through the sky pass over those empty places in your birth chart, if that makes sense. So if today the moon were in Aquarius, it would be passing through your 12th house, and that would bring out this intermittent side of you that's kind of activated when there's a planetary energy going through that space in the sky. And so that's when these empty houses start being presences rather than absences in your chart. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like to describe it as, the natal chart shows the full lifetime potential that you have. But there are, as you can tell through the delineations, there are very, very many different ways a planet can manifest depending on its sign, its position by house, and its relationship to other planets. So when looking at any of these, you could easily do a sort of like spin. We lean positive on the show because, it's in public and we don't want to like dig up all of people's dirt astrologically for just the public to see, right? Because that's rude, but also it's not very helpful in a lot of ways. Because you could easily come up with a negative manifestation for all of these placements because it's just all about how you deal with the energy, right? Like a Mercury and Gemini, you might call like, oh, they talk too much or blah blah, which isn't true for you because you've got a bunch of other stuff that mutes it out. But you can pick any part of the chart and really like go after it. But to add on to Maybe's point as well is that the empty houses, all they really mean is that you don't have a significant emphasis there. So if we were to look at the opposing, like if we just flipped everything and took everything out of these placements and put them all in these placements, that'd be a very interesting chart because you'd be looking at somebody who's very focused on relationships with other people. They're very focused on their personal possessions and things that they own. They're very focused on their like day-to-day routines, health habits, and like work life overall, and just like the deep details of that. With a bunch of stuff in the 6th house, you often will end up with people who like have a very rigorous schedule depending on what sign is there. And in the 12th, this is also somebody who deals a lot with like letting things go, with like processing trauma, with like probably working in healing professions with other people, things like that. But also coming back to your original natal chart, as these planets do transit the empty houses, they still carry the significations of your natal chart. So even if, say, you have the sun coming into your 7th house, you might have more of an emphasis because the sun literally brings light wherever it is. When it goes into the 7th house, you might realize for that month you have more of an emphasis on your relationships or on your marriage or, your business partnerships and things like that. But it's still likely to tie back to your 5th house, which is your personal hobbies, your creations, and your play in some way because your sun is still... Oh, I'm sorry, that would be your moon. But your sun... would be Leo. So it would be related to your, where's your Leo? It would be related to your sixth house. So routines, habits, responsibilities, health, work, stuff like that in some way. And you can do this for all of the planets, and you can do it on multiple levels. You can look at like interactions between the planets, and there's many, many techniques for prediction and deeper analysis that you can go into. We're barely scratching the surface here. It gets very deep.
Yeah, I'm sort of glimpsing the lip of the rabbit hole here.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of friends who've gotten into astrology, like professionally, and I would look at their websites and there would be like a price advertised for like a 4-hour session. And I'd be like, that's a bunch of bullshit. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Like, I don't know if I've ever been in a situation where like a 4-hour coaching session is like required, but I'm seeing how this could get really, really deep divey.
Yeah.
Cool. For the record, I'd love to hear about like my dirt and like what's going wrong with me, because I think that's important to me. Like error detection is important to me. The only like personality type system I know much about and that I'm invested in is the Enneagram. And I think one thing that's really cool about the Enneagram is it focuses really hard on failure modes. And I'm sure like astrology is capable of the same thing. So I think if I hired you guys, I've loved this experience of hearing nice things about myself and seeing your smiling faces. But I would love to see like the dark side of the chart gone into further, because I think that could be really helpful. Even as just like a narrative framing for stuff I maybe like know already, but haven't fully systematized or like brought into the light.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're fine going a little bit over time, we can totally do that.
Can we say like 5 minutes? Like a speed dating of my issues.
Yeah. I'll give you a quick overview of what I'm seeing, and I'll turn it over to Maybe as well. So like, one of the biggest things for issues and personal stuff can be the node. So the North Node in Pisces right here, I actually always just go to this book because it really tends to like nail people right away. Let's see. It's by Jan Spiller. It's called Astrology for the Soul, and it basically just digs into the descriptions of all of the nodes. So actually, let me pull up the Kindle version, which I already do not have up.
Oh, by the way, earlier on, you said you know maybe you talk too much, but it's controlled by other energies. It's not. I never stop talking. I never stop talking. I get up and I start talking, and then at night I'm still talking.
Gotcha.
So,
yeah, and it's interesting because like there you kind of see the behavior of the ascendant, right? Because like I personally don't know you super well, Sasha. You know, we're mutuals. I think we like each other overall on Twitter, but at the same time, like, in our first interactions, you were a little bit more demure, a little bit more muted as your Piscean side was showing itself, because that's kind of like the default projection, right? But now that we know each other a little more, and now that we're getting more comfortable, the Gemini talky starts to come out. So that's just one example of kind of like how you can see the layers. But so this is Jan Spiller's book, and it's North Node in Pisces, or 12th house. And it's interesting because you have what I call like a contradictory node, I guess is a term I just came up with, where you can do it both by house and by sign, and your node is in the first house, but the sign is the 12th sign. And so they're actually like almost exactly opposing natures overall. So let's see, working in these areas can help uncover hidden gifts and talents. For Pisces, North Node, being non-judgmental, compassion, surrendering anxiety to a higher power, freeing the mind through meditation, self-reflection, focusing on the spiritual pathway, trusting in positive outcomes, acknowledging connection with the universe, welcoming change. And the tendencies that can be difficult, indicated by this, are hyper-anxiety, over-analysis, obsessive worrying, exaggeration of the importance of certain details, critical first reactions, fault-finding, anxiety of mistakes, perfectionism, staying in unpleasant situations, or in inflexibility. How does that land?
Anxiety is an interesting one because I avoid anxiety in my life, but that's because I stay away from situations that make me afraid and anxious. Mm-hmm. So like that could be like feeling anxiety intensely provokes avoidance, right?
Yeah.
Like, I noticed that I don't have a normal job because I don't like being kept to a schedule because, there's all this stuff I might be missing out on at like Monday at 3 p.m., right? In terms of like fault finding and harsh judgments, totally. Like, it's taken a lot of work for me to be like not a totally critical asshole about things I don't understand at first glance. And even still, that is very much a live option for me. Like in the past, I've judged astrology on those terms, right? I see like something in the newspaper and it seems stupid. So I'm like, oh, that whole thing is stupid. Like, I find something bad and then I take it as a synecdoche for the whole, and thus I judge the whole. Like, that's definitely a tendency that I've had to like work on and keep an eye out for.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the flip side of this, because your North Node is in the first house, like that was the Pisces or 12th house North Node considerations. So in the first house, it's all about developing independence, self-awareness, trusting one's impulses, courage, constructive self-interest, moderation and giving, self-nurturance, and then leaving behind seeing oneself through others' eyes, or over-selflessness, or being too nice, or obsessive attachment to fairness and justice, codependency, or attachment to an external form of harmony, or a tit for tat mentality. So that's the other side of the node that you can interpret.
Got it. Interesting. Being Mr. Nice. Do I do that? Maybe. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah. This is Astrology for the Soul by Jan Spiller, if you want to look it up. Each section is great. And, for you, I think one is going to apply more than the other, just depending, right? Because I often find that it is the... well, it kind of depends. You just kind of have to see which one resonates. Sometimes it's the sign, sometimes it's the house. But, all right, how about you, maybe? You want to throw some shade at this chart?
Yeah, well, one thing is I did mention that you had Venus retrograde, but of the things that can be retrograde in a chart, more than half of them are retrograde in your chart. And so depending on whether you take a more traditional or a more modern bent on retrograde energy, it can be difficult in different ways. But either way, it is seen as something that is generally more difficult than having planets that are not retrograde. So in the traditional sense, all of the significations that have to do with your Neptune, your Saturn, your Uranus, your Pluto, and your Venus would all be potentially delayed or take more conscious effort to uncover or express to other people. So there may be challenges getting other people to understand you. You may have a reputation for being a weirdo, and there's something like there's like the parts of being a weirdo that are really endearing, and those come through in your chart too. But I imagine once in a while you come off to people as a weirdo in a way that they can't understand and relate to, and it's difficult sometimes to navigate that kind of disconnection. The other thing that I would notice in this chart is that there are squares and oppositions, which are considered more challenging aspects. So as much as, for instance, this opposition between your Sun in Chiron and Cancer and your Saturn and Uranus in Sagittarius, as much as that ultimately is something that allows you to bring compassion forward into your public life, I don't think that that's an uncomplicated journey for you. I think that it probably is a sort of tug of war between two different parts of yourself that ultimately ends up in something good, but probably has its own mistakes and pitfalls that show themselves once in a while too. And then the square between your Mars and your Venus Mercury conjunction, I imagine, would come out in a sharp tongue. I wonder if maybe on bad days, in tough conversations, you might say things that you don't feel good about later sometimes, and maybe it would be easy to just forget about the ways that you can hurt other people's feelings, perhaps potentially sometimes. I've seen in my own life Mars and Pisces can sometimes have a bit of a sort of forgetfulness, or like a selective forgetfulness even, or at least it can look selective from the outside, where maybe it would take some real planning to or intentionality to like go through and clear like resentment backlogs in relationships for you. It might not be something that comes naturally to you to remember, hey, I didn't like how I acted in that conversation, and I want to come back now that I've cooled off and say I'm sorry. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's something that I might expect from a difficult square between Mars and Mercury and Venus in another part of the chart.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely be self-righteous and self-selective. Self-selective? It's redundant. Selective about what about which behaviors of mine I recall easily. That's for sure true. And I think like in terms of having a sharp tongue, I'm actually generally a pretty fucking nice guy. But I definitely like say I definitely say mean things in my head. There are a lot of like untyped tweets to people. And I think like earlier in my life, I just went around saying that everything was horrible and terrible and like criticizing everything around me. And that's just something that's I've sort of like beaten out of myself over time. Like the critical voice for me is very real. And it's one of those like those things. I really believe in the Aristotelian framing of like there's no such thing as a virtue or a flaw strictly defined. Like it's all like a spectrum of behavior that you have, and you just have to sort of slide around on that spectrum. I think like critical faculties can be good. Like it's good to apprehend, and it's good to like spot flaws in situations and ways people are making decisions and like structures in life. But it can also just be me being self-righteous. So I think that rings true. And the nature of selectivity means that I forget that. So it's good to be reminded.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've run up to our time limit. Do you feel ready to wrap, Sasha?
I feel ready to wrap. This has been a pleasure and a delight, and you guys are super fun. This has been fun. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sasha. Thank you so much, Maybe. Thank you, chat, for watching. As always, this is a wrap on AstroPilled number 12, and we're going to close the stream out right now. Bye, all.